straight up live or if I do. So we are live right now, so if
Okay.
at any time you wanted to get going.
All right, let's do it. Welcome to AOE Live, episode number 12. We are recording this show live on Tuesday, August 25th. We are here tonight with Cindy Foley, Executive Assistant Director and Director of Learning and Experience at the Columbus Museum of Art. Or, as she is described in her TED Talk, an art educator, change agent, and creativity advocate. She will talk to us tonight about how we, as art teachers, have the unique opportunity to step up and lead the creative revolution. I'm Tim Bogatz, a high school art teacher from Omaha, Nebraska.
And I'm Andrew McCormick, and I'm an 8th grade and 9th grade art teacher in Cedar Falls, Iowa. And you might also know Cindy. She was our keynote speaker at the AOE Summer Conference, and also, of course, from her incredible TED Talk entitled Teaching Art, or Teaching to Think Like an Artist. We're going to ask her tonight how art teachers hold the keys for how our world is going to start seeing creativity in the future, and how we need to be the face of that movement. So, Cindy, welcome. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm thrilled to be here.
Okay.
Awesome.
Well, thank you. We are thrilled to have you. We also want to say hello to our listeners and those that are watching live. If you're watching on Crowdcast, we need you to tell us, how many times have you watched Cindy's TED Talk?
Yeah, we definitely want to hear from you guys. You know the routine with Crowdcast. You can upvote questions, and I've been really impressed. There's some really great, poignant questions, some questions that Tim and I have already kind of put in our little Q&A that we want to talk to Cindy about, but we'll touch on some other ones as well. So make sure you follow along on Twitter as well with the hashtag AOE Live to recap any good points and just to kind of stay in contact with us.
And as always, once we're done tonight, the podcast will be available on the AOE Live page and will go up later this week on iTunes and Stitcher. Listen to it on your drive to school, at home in the evening, or even during your plan time.
Yep, so Cindy, let's get started with a pretty heavy topic. Why is it that you hate adult coloring books so much?
Okay. I knew you'd come in hard in the beginning, right?
Oh yeah, hard hitting.
Yeah. So, of course, I don't hate these coloring books, but they are emblematic of the challenge I think we face. I was really, really pissed off. Ticked off with NPR because there was this huge article about this, kind of these new wonderful adult coloring books, but it was really an NPR editor who inserted creativity in the title of the article. Right. And the amazing thing about these adult coloring books and why they are so popular is they actually do something a lot of adults need, probably the three of us included. They are incredibly good at calming us down, kind of finding almost a zen to a very tough day. I mean, there's a lot of present moment kind of stuff that happens when you're doing these. There's also some great art-related things that do happen. I was thinking about you do get the pattern finding and the color theory that you can play with all of that, but it's not idea generation. Mm-hmm. So the minute someone attaches creativity, that word, that loaded word that I'm so particular about, I guess. Mm-hmm. That's when it appears that I'm on the attack. And my son has one of those gorgeous, shaped coloring books, but it's for, it's like a Lego, putting together a Lego project. Right. There's some sort of satisfaction for him, but it's not the same thing as when he's building a kind of a Lego insane structure and he's struggling and he's developing an idea. So it's just the differentiation of what words we attach to these types of activities, right?
And they're both good activities. It's just
yes.
To call one creative versus it's kind of following along and meditative. Right, it's kind of a misnomer. They've kind of miscategorized it. Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong. Some of the best coloring books today are ones that have been totally hacked by artists.
Oh, sure.
They find them in thrift stores, and they, they take the content and go. I mean, there's been some great contemporary artists that have taken that, these traditional coloring books and really played with them. So there's I think for art teachers, we can mine it as long as we hack them.
So Cindy, your art museum has done some really just awesome work as far as reaching out and to the community, getting the community involved, and in the realm of museum education and doing a lot of really new and interesting ideas. Can you talk a little bit about your job, kind of what you do and what your goals are as a museum educator?
Sure. You know, I think like all of you out there, my job has changed over the years as needs change. And one thing is now I'm kind of like a junior deputy director, which means I'm in a position where half of my job is to push the thinking of others, and it's kind of an amazing place to be. And I think it's what we do as educators anyway. But it's less about, you know, another side of me is I am a practitioner too, and I'm always thinking about my creative practice and the practice of the team, the learning team that I work with. But on the bigger role, the bigger hat I play is now, how do I move an institution to think differently? What's the role of an art museum in the 21st century? Is it about these objects and you know, history, or is it about a space that can cultivate you know, communities, you know, identity around themselves as creators and thinkers? So, you know, that big piece, that visioning piece has been sitting on me quite a bit recently. But I'll also say at our museum, what we've been able to do, because we're going through a capital campaign, and we're about to open a brand new wing. And when we decided to do that, our director made a very important decision. She said, in addition to changing physically on the outside, we needed to reflect on who we were on the inside. And that was the door opening to us as, I think, educators to say, yeah, what are we doing? Are we being intentional about what we're doing? Are we having impact? So I really think the biggest change we've made at the museum is to focus on something we are all pretty passionate about, which is creativity, and let go of a lot of work we used to do. So, you know, we used to be queens and kings of lesson plans, and we don't create them anymore. I mean, it's hard to imagine, but what we began to realize is that what educators needed help with, it wasn't another lesson plan that they weren't really going to use. They needed a colleague that helped them think about creativity in their own practice, and so it shifted our work quite a bit. So at the museum, that's the short story of what I do at the museum.
That's interesting. So it's kind of like you got away from the more prescriptive stuff that you were giving to teachers and tried to do the more sort of open-ended, how can we help you get at this bigger thing, which is probably a little bit more ambiguous and uncertain. Definitely. Yeah. Absolutely.
And I think at first it was awkward. You know, we had a story we all played. You know, the art teachers played a particular role. We played a particular role. So we almost had to, you know, we have worked with the Columbus City School art teachers for over 40 years. And that was the group where we decided, wait a minute, you know, let's reinvent this. And there's a group of art teachers at CCS that we still, to this day, meet with monthly. Starting in 2008, we started a practice in which we began to question all of the relationships we had together and began to work differently together.
Tim, are you still there, bud?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, no, hear me now? I didn't hear you for a second, Tim. I'm sorry about that.
Okay. No, that's all right. Hey.
There he is.
So, if we can move on real quick, though. In your AOE conference talk, Cindy, you opened with the phrase, art skill does not equal creativity. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the idea or your thinking behind that phrase, and why you think that type of thinking needs to be shifted, and maybe most importantly, how does that shift start as we move toward the creative aspect of things?
In the TED Talk, I talk about my husband, and I think we all have outside influences that really impact our work. The thing I don't mention about Sean is that he teaches college art. He's a professor of art, and he was a painting and drawing professor. But something happened about 10 years ago in which he started coming home, and he was talking about the incoming students, the freshmen. And he would say, Cindy, they're the most technically skilled students I've ever seen. They're incredible, but I can't get them to think. They're fearful of having their own ideas. And I will give them an incredibly ambiguous color theory project, and they'll say to me, but what do you want me to make?
Right.
And he was like, I don't know what to do. I mean, it was a real conundrum, and it really started happening about 10, probably 15 years ago. I don't want to address our age anymore, but 15 years now, in which we started to see students, and he would reflect on it quite a bit. And it's not that I value skill, but it's the emphasis on skill that I think has become a little bit more problematic. And there is an art teacher, and I'm going to give you his name, and you guys should Google, everyone should Google Todd Elkin. He's an art teacher in San Francisco. Okay. And Todd often talks to me. He and I will have these long existential talks. And he'll say, that he goes back and forth about the art skill piece quite a bit. But he'll say that, and I've got a quote here that I'm kind of hybridizing his quote, but that the more a student has developed an idea and takes that idea seriously, the more invested they are in actually developing the skill that they need for them to make the project come into reality. So it's almost like, how do you don't want to put the chicken before the or whatever the analogy, the cart before the horse, and he says, so it's a dance, and what we have to do is we have to get them really comfortable with developing ideas, and then be right there saying, bingo. Now, what are you going to have to do? You're going to have some chiaroscuro. You want that to look realistic, or you want, or we're in the YouTube generation. And I think one thing, since I've worked in museums as long as I have, the art world to me is, photography being completely manipulated. It's artists working in, using materials we couldn't have even imagined 5 years ago. So one of the questions I always am grappling with is, what if the technical skill is something I have absolutely no knowledge of? And isn't that okay as long as the student can go to YouTube and find out, hey, I need to do this. So skill is important. It's just where it is in their idea generation, Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think you make a good argument there. And yeah, it's interesting to think about, because there are so many art teachers who say, we need the ideas first, skills can come later, and then on the flip side, we have to say we need to develop the skills so that they can truly bring out their ideas. And so, like you said, it's kind of a balancing act to try and figure out where your comfort level is, on each side of the spectrum.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Okay, and then this next one, I think it's going to take me a little while to spit all this out, but if you can indulge me for just a minute. I want to jump into something you said in your AOE talk about where art education has been and kind of where it's headed.
Right.
Okay, so Victor Lowenfeld, way back when, it was very much about the child-centered approach. And, as that took hold and then went on for a while, people started thinking that was too, laissez-faire, too messy, and we kind of shifted toward the really, disciplined, exacting DBAE approach. And for a lot of people, these days that approach has kind of run its course, and like Andrew especially is kind of running away screaming and yelling from DBAE. And then other people like me have made a little more gradual shift away from that. So I guess my question is, where is that balance for you as far as teacher direction and student-centered learning? Like where do we go from here with that balance, or where do you think we should go?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first to just kind of reiterate your point, I mean, not 10 years ago, I was one of the biggest advocates for DBAE. I'm a museum person. I mean, it was, when I was in graduate school, DBAE was at its height, and I was incredibly excited by it. I was excited by, we were talking about art history. We were talking about criticism, and that was exciting. What's happened is we just can't get stuck in a particular place. And now I think I can see some of the flaws, but I also see some of the benefits of DBAE. But we cannot let anything stay a formula, and each of us have to negotiate that. I will tell you, guys, I have a luxury in that I work in an art museum, and it is a luxury. And for all of the educators who are out there who may get frustrated with some of the things I talk about, half of that is that I am not in a space where I necessarily have to follow any kind of set of rules. So as we have moved away from teacher-centered to student-driven, we have been able to take incredible risks because there isn't the same kind of accountability. The museum can make a lot of mistakes, and so I'll give you some examples of the kind of things we've done, which in the beginning were messy. But we changed all of our summer workshops. We used to have traditional workshops that would be like, painting for fourth graders, come in and do all kinds of different kinds of painting and experiment with painting. Now we do workshops. I'll give you an example of one my kids did. One of my kids did, he was in the haunted house workshop. Okay. And what that meant is they came in, they talked about haunted houses. They brainstormed what they loved about haunted houses. They talked about the kinds of, what are the tricks? They watched YouTube videos. What the educator did is had to think about this whole range of what the students might be curious about, but also be willing to say, oh my gosh, I had never thought of the ghosty kind of residue that's left behind. I wonder how we'd make that. Maybe we should Google and find out. Because then the prompt was, how would we make a haunted house? Some of the kids immediately realized, well, we're going to have to draw scary things. Other kids were like, it's got to be multi-sensual, and there's going to have to be things you accidentally stick your hands into, and it's gooey. And immediately, kids started working on different areas. And we have the luxury, because of the time and how we scaffold it, where we were able to let the students begin to develop their ideas and then go to YouTube and learn how to make goo, or realize they were going to want, see-through, they were using the sewing machines to make fabric ghosts. So, we've definitely moved to a student-directed. But I will say, the amount of work we put in ahead of time in order to make space for the student-directed is as much, if not more, but we at this point have the luxury to experiment in those kind of ways. A lot of the educators that I follow, and I love many art educators out there in the world, but I have some local favorites too, and I love to watch their practice. And one
Right.
of the things I've noticed with their shift from teacher-directed to student-directed is sometimes it starts in small ways. It may be a creative challenge in which they don't know what the end may be. But then the project they move into next is more teacher-directed. So it's a little bit of a marriage again of that.
Okay.
Right.
And then just kind of following up with something that that you mentioned. Part of your TED Talk that I really, really loved was when you talked about the 3 habits of artists that kids need to develop. Okay? The comfort with ambiguity, the ability to generate ideas, and then being able to appreciate that idea of sort of transdisciplinary research.
Right.
Okay, so kind of following up with the teacher aspect of things, how do we best make kids comfortable with ambiguity, especially in our teacher mode or our teacher-directed mode, if we're not necessarily comfortable with ambiguity ourselves?
The number one thing is transparency. And this is hard, I think, for a lot of us in education, is to really show our vulnerable side. And, we talk about it a lot in my environment, is, when is it we can say, I'm not necessarily comfortable right now in what's happening, and I feel a little out of control, but I trust. And I've got a story to tell you about a teacher we worked with.
Okay.
We have an institute at the museum called Teaching for Creativity Institute, and this was and it can be, I'd say half of the teachers are art teachers, but the others come from other disciplines. And this teacher was a history teacher, and she gave me this wonderful example of, she was talking to her students. They were going to start a whole unit on class and the Roman class system and all these different class systems, and she was introducing them to the ideas. And there was a student in the class that had this breakthrough moment where they said, oh my gosh, it's exactly like middle school. And the other kids were like, oh, you're so right. And they started saying, these classes that, were in the Roman, they're just like the hipsters and they started making all these analogies. And she felt her heart begin to surge, and she realized, oh, this is what Cindy's been talking about. I either like entertain their conversation and then we go back to my lesson, or I prepare to abandon my lesson and let them go in this new direction that is really driven by their ideas. And she let go, and for over a month she let the students interview middle schoolers, all the middle schoolers, to find out how close those systems were. She let them create a day in which they, could all come in. There was some sort of fair around the class system, and it was all driven by the students. And of course, she still had to have her standards, but she told the students, I am so freaked out about this, but I trust you guys. I trust that you're so passionate about it. I'm going to go with you. And I think it was her transparency that made it work.
So, Cindy, real quick on the practical side, have you worked with this teacher since then, and has she talked about kind of if that moment, that breakthrough moment of transparency and being okay with ambiguity, has that led to more moments like that in the classroom for her?
Yeah. What was amazing in this one, and I have examples of some other teachers too, I think what happens is we build confidence. I mean, it's tough for us, especially we're building new habits when we shift into some of this work around creativity. But the moment we have a success, and like she said, if it would have bombed, I'm not sure I would be saying, okay, I'm willing to try it next year.
Right.
But it did. And it actually ended up getting the attention of the principal, and the parents were really intrigued by it. So that's a perfect example of something that her being able to let go allowed her to imagine doing something like that again. And so then it helps us build confidence around the steps we have to take in order to allow students to drive more of the learning. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Cindy, your focus on creativity reminds me a lot about what's really popular now, or I shouldn't say popular, but trending in a positive way in art ed, which is choice-based ed and teaching
Yep.
for artistic behaviors. And I wonder, and this is just kind of me thinking out loud, if most of the teachers that have transitioned to that approach of teaching had kind of an aha breakthrough moment where it's like, well, I tried this thing and it really totally worked and I was able to connect with their interests, and now like they kind of can't go back. And I wonder if it's kind of similar to that teacher who had that transparency breakthrough Roman Empire middle school moment. So
Right.
it'd be interesting for Tim and I to kind of like pull all these teachers that identify as choice-based art ed to see, like, did you kind of have an epiphany or a moment where it all just started to click? And then, you know, if it did, it really is. I know me personally, it's kind of hard to go back once you've kind of seen the benefits of student-centered and creativity. So switching gears just a little bit, you know, creativity is just advocated for everywhere in STEM classes and business and let's do this and let's do that. And, you know, sometimes we as art teachers can be kind of off on the side being like, we do this, you know. So how do you think that we can become loud vocal champions for this new sort of revolution that needs to happen in education?
I'm glad we're talking about this, because I would say, you know, in my AOE talk, I said we've got to start advocating. And, you know, it's been 8 years now I've been on this champion, you know, role. And it's interesting. One group that I struggled with right away was the burgeoning STEM community. And I'll tell you a little bit of a story what happened here. STEM in Columbus is very much tied to Battelle. It's the #1 research, scientific research company in the world. I mean, it's one of the biggest nonprofit research companies. And they're incredible. They started the STEM movement. The first STEM school was here in Columbus, and it was very much science, technology, mathematics, engineering. And immediately I was talking to them because we're going through a capital campaign, and you know they're one of our funders and all this stuff, right? And I kept thinking, no, wait a minute, something's wrong, something's wrong. And finally it dawned on me that their conversation, the reason it wasn't working for me was, one, I didn't want to be another discipline trying to jump into some sort of gang, you know, this group. That I was advocating for a way of thinking and a way of experiencing the world. I kept talking more about, it's about how artists think and how they experience the world and the role they play in society. It's not about just them, you know, being artists. And as of this year, Battelle has stopped calling STEM, science, technology, mathematics, and engineering. They are calling it, and I want everyone to listen, strategies that engage minds. Think about that. Right. Strategies that engage minds. And the reason they've shifted gears is all the research they were doing, looking at the impact of STEM on girls going into the field, more people going into the field. It hasn't worked because they've been focused on the discipline. So if you shift that around and you say, wait a minute, it can't be about the discipline, let's instead champion the thinking. And this is where I really want art teachers to get confident and actually just you know, be powerful in that we've always been thinking about the mind and how we as artists, how we question over answer, right? How we play, what we, you know, so all of these aspects of creativity have been embedded in our work. We just need to bring them to the forefront and be out there talking about the strategies that we use to engage minds. And then we're not fighting against the other folks who have been running away with creativity at this point, who are shifting gears. Yeah.
Oh, that's really, and that's a great analogy, kind of running away with creativity. I mean, it is such a like prized little nugget that
Yeah.
everyone's kind of saying they do better, and I just really love the fact that they've shifted
Hmm.
away from the disciplines to then the mindset, which is really fantastic. Um,
Absolutely.
I want to pony on to what kind of Tim said, and my favorite part also of your talk were the three kind of main tenets that you thought that this educational
Hmm.
revolution should take on. And Tim already kind of asked you about how we get teachers to be more all right with ambiguity. So I want to talk about your second point, your second tenet, which is idea generation.
Yeah.
Um, and I know this goes back to kind of the story, your husband's frustration with these really talented, skillful artists who
Hmm.
just weren't able to run with ideas. So how do we get there? How do we get ideas to be generated? Where should ideas come from? And what part do you think art history should play in that? How much is too much influence? What about appropriation? That's about 5 questions all in one right there. So I
Yeah, I got
apologize.
it.
I
I
kind of
got it.
piled on. I just kept
Yeah.
rambling.
Well, I like to think of ourselves, art teachers in particular, and of course I'm in a museum, so I'm very excited about this, as we're more of curiosity breeders.
Mm,
And I think when I'm at my best is, starting a lesson, and I show a student something they've never seen before. Whether it's Un Chien Andalou, the French film where the eyeball is slit and you get a whole
Yes,
bunch of like
yes.
freshmen, you're like, oh my gosh, when was this made? Or it's a work of art, from our collection where they're just, it's, where awe and wonder is kicked in. Because I think the premise of our work, in order for us to accomplish what we need to do next, we have to have set the stage a little bit. There's got to be, the awe and wonder. We have to introduce them to new things. But then we have to do the harder part, which is make space for what they are excited by. And this one's been a little harder for me to learn, and my husband and I often talk about it. Is what if what they really are into is music I can't stand, or what if it? But it's that hybrid thing that begins to happen where they've watched a clip of a film that I've shown them, and then they come in and they show me a video by a music artist that they're really into, and we're like, wow, okay, there's something there, that juxtaposition there. What can we do with that? What do you want to do with that? And then our role becomes, premier questioners. We're there to really push their thinking. And of course, now I'm talking more high school, but starting with kindergartners. I love doing this with kindergartners because they find everything fascinating. So you're constantly just got to be on top of it. It's the stuff that comes into school in their pockets that Emily Reeser, one of the teachers in Bexley here, she has a sticky wall in which, as the kids come in and they have fascinating things they show her, she's like, hey, is this something that should go on the wall as inspiration? And so it's allowing the kids' ideas to take space alongside of all the things she finds fascinating from, art, and so it's the space in between. And I think as far as idea generation, we're helping them get confidence around what makes them curious and realize that they can have ideas around that. Now, the other side of idea generation, and I'm a big believer of Torrance, the Torrance creativity test, but Ellis Torrance really did some amazing work looking at, if we want to develop ideas, what do we need to do? And there's the fluency, the flexibility, the originality, and elaboration. And I believe that one of the best places to start is fluency. And when I get really excited when I'm on Facebook and I see some of the teacher groups that are doing some incredible work where they're just having kids in a sketchbook all the time, because it's about those constant ideas and just drawing and ideas just going into the book. There's no preciousness to them, but it's about, we got to get comfortable with not just one idea. I think we all know the worst thing you can tell a student is, let's be creative. I need a good idea, because that almost inhibits any ideas. But instead, how do we generate fluency of ideas, lots of ideas, so that then they can go back and say, actually, most of those weren't so great, but that one, that was the moment. That was one I'm proud of, And then being able to flex between ideas too.
The other thing I think of is, hearing you talk about this, I think, ideas take a lot of time to kind of like breathe and bump into things. And sometimes, I hear teachers bemoan how, our students today have lost creativity and they don't come up with ideas anymore. And I'm struck by, well, they didn't have an idea when you asked them at 11:37 right then and there.
Right.
Like, what do you want to make your work about? And they didn't know. And I kind of equate that to like when you meet someone new and you're getting to know each other and they're like, what kind of music do you like? And you're like, you have plenty of bands and musicians you like, but when you're put on the spot right away, you're just like, I don't know. Later you'll get back to them. So I wonder if like allowing more time for ideas to kind of, breathe would be a good idea. So I want to actually go back kind of with your idea of these kindergartners who are just endlessly curious. The end of your TED Talk, you talked about centers for creativity.
Yeah.
So if you could picture a school that was really redesigned to really cater to chasing after kids' interests and facilitating their interests, how different do you think those schools would look like, and what would they look like? What are some things that have to change?
I think this is that dream that we all kind of have every once in a while, and then it becomes a nightmare too. I've had some people come up to me after the TED Talk and be like, "You should open a school," and you're like, "Yeah." Wait a minute, I don't want to do that. But I'm going to tell you, the person that has been probably the most, in addition to my husband, which is incredibly influential in my thinking. The school I would love to build would be the George Sekeli School. And I don't know if you guys know George Sekeli. He's about to become the next president of NAEA.
Yep.
He was my professor, and he was the one who said, "Cindy, it's in play. It's in play is the process of art, and but it's the process of life. I mean, it really is." And I often imagine that my dream school would utilize a lot of different things. It would have tab centers, and it would have Art 21, artist projects, and there would be all these wonderful things happening. But at the end of the day, there'd be a focus on play, because when a student is engaged in deep, meaningful, thoughtful play, they are, they're at that space where they're learning actually the most. They're learning about themselves and how they learn, but also about, the things that are exciting in whatever topic may be at hand. And I always find that when I am struggling with a project, I go back to a lot of Sekeli's books, and I actually have one. If you guys, here's my little pitch. If you guys haven't seen, this is Play and Creativity in Art Teaching, and I think I'd love to see that more as a premise for a school. How might that look, and how would we cultivate this underpinning of play in our work? I don't know if that's clear as far as how we'd structure a school, but he's the one I think about when I think about the ideal school.
Very cool.
And I know it's easy to get really pessimistic about kind of where we're at creativity-wise, but I kind of look at the backlash against standardized testing that's happening in so many states, and also national core standards. There's kind of some uproar against that, and I do think slowly but surely people are chipping away at that, parent groups, teachers, and I do think what's going to replace it, I don't know if it's truly play-centric, but I do think there's going to be this notion on that obedience is overrated, right? That we shouldn't just like sit down, be quiet, fill your head full of knowledge, that there needs to be more project-based, hands-on, exploratory types of learning, because that's when it really works. I mean, we don't need to do the sit and be quiet and get this information because we have the internet for that. Like, you don't need to do that anymore. So I'm hopeful that it's coming.
Well, and there are examples of that, like High Tech High out in San Diego, or the gaming school that's out in, I think it's in Washington, D.C. They are, in essence, versions of this play school, but because they've framed them around technology or gaming. But, you know, the one I envision is around art. It is around, you know, but with the transdisciplinary piece, where we would constantly be, oh, let's make a restaurant. So what do we need to know to make a restaurant? How do we, you know, what, you know, it's the way that artists think and the way they go through life, questioning and what would we learn in an environment like that?
And if I can give you one last question here before we get out of here. We've talked, you know, all night here about all these great experiences that, you know, we can provide for our kids. And John Dewey, who's a huge influence for me, and I know you love him too, but you know, he has this quote that we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on that experience. So would you have any suggestions for our teachers to help our students kind of reflect on those experiences and kind of improve their learning along with those experiences?
Absolutely. And I actually, the only 3 books I brought with me were George Sekeli, and I have 2 others. But the reflecting on experience I've become even more adamant about, especially as people are questioning kind of us, and you know, they're saying, well, it can't be laissez-faire, and the more you structure this, the less laissez-faire it is. But the more you think about the reflection part, the more the students begin to understand their own learning. So the couple references I want to point out are Project Zero's done some amazing work around this. Making thinking visible and thinking routines in general are tremendous. So something like See, Think, Wonder. Whether it is a natural phenomenon, whether it is a work of art, having students start with a project with See, Think, Wonder, but then at the end of the project landing on, okay, what do we now see, think, wonder? They have so many good thinking routines, and depending on what you're trying to accomplish, you know, one we probably use every single day at the museum is, I used to think, now I think. And that allows, in particular in art, when parents are questioning, you know, oh, well, they're just making beautiful things, or they're making things. Now it's about that thinking, that intense thinking, that going into this lesson, I used to think, you know, whatever it may be about, there's a teacher, Emily Reeser, I've brought her up before. She does this project in which she asks 5th and 6th graders to reflect on what do they think a social issue that's important to their family is. In the beginning, she asked them this question, what do you think? And then at the end. And in the beginning, they're not even sure what a social issue is. By the end, they're so emotional and attached to whatever social issue they do their art project around that they're champions of that social issue. So, you know, using a thinking routine not only helps the student identify how they've changed, but it helps the other educators in your school, the parents, really see that growth as well. So thinking routines and the work of Project Zero are a fabulous resource. And you can get most of those thinking routines on their website for free. So definitely go Project Zero Thinking Routines and you can find us.
Very cool. Great suggestion. So thank you. But before we get out of here, it is time for the lightning round. So we have 5 quick questions and 5 quick answers from you. All right. So number 1, what is your favorite art museum that is not your own?
Okay. I hope you guys know this one. The Museum of Jurassic Technology in Los Angeles.
Okay.
Do you know it?
I just went on vacation in July and we were there. So yes, we know
it. It's awesome because it's really questioning what is a museum, and so I love it for its it was for me. I've lived in a museum for so long. I actually got in a state of wonder again in that museum, and so the other one would be the City Museum in St. Louis, which again, you know, for someone who's lived in museums for so long, that's awesome.
Yeah, I've heard just great things about that. I haven't seen it yet. It's on my to-do list very, very soon. So
yeah,
so Cindy, we've been putting you on task here all night talking about creativity. So we're gonna keep you on edge here. So if you were a new crayon, what would you look like, and what would your name be? New name, crayon, and what would you look like?
You know, so one of the things, especially when I was in art school and you know, becoming an art teacher myself, I loved to go through the aisles of Crayola, and I loved the weird products they came out with, especially the failure products. Yeah. Well, and so I'm going to totally rip off my daughter, who this summer, okay, this is a little creepy, but she started collecting like these, you know, dead bumblebees and dragonflies in the back of the, you know, our little porch. And I realized, you know, she was kind of crumbling them. And when I thought of that, I immediately thought of maybe there's the dead bug, you know, crayon or something, you know, where you play with the pigments of the dead bugs, and maybe it's also a statement about, oh, the bees are dying and we need to be more careful, and wax and crayon. So there's where my brain went when you guys asked that question. So
that's fantastic.
I'm sure that's going to be a bestseller.
Yeah, I know. Everybody
flying off the shelves.
Nice. All right, and then we know you brought your bookshelf along tonight.
Oh, yeah.
Best book you've ever read?
Okay, well, I'll tell you the best book I'm reading right now is A Beautiful Question, and it's great. I love it, Warren Berger. But I have to admit, probably the best book I've ever read, it changes because when you have children of your own, you start to realize how books can evoke the imagination. And the one that absolutely just makes me cry and makes my daughter cry, you're going to think it's crazy, but it's Grace Runs for President. I don't know if any of you have read it.
Yes.
It's a lovely book, and I guess it's where we're at. She's a second grader, and you know, it's just it's where my heart is about right now, where she actually does believe that that's something, you know, the power of imagination, right?
Yes.
And so I got to believe it too.
Very cool.
Very cool. So, Cindy, besides visiting the Columbus Art Museum, what would you recommend we do the next time any of our listeners are in the lovely state of Ohio?
Oh my gosh. Well, how many of you guys ever read Bone, or have students that read Bone, the graphic novel?
Yeah.
Well, if you're going to be in Columbus, you're going to have to take this little trip down to southern Ohio, and it's a little bit into Appalachia. But the entire premise of Bone is based in, right outside of Athens is Old Man's Cave, and it's this phenomenal place. So take a little field trip to Old Man's Cave to see where the inspiration for the Bone books was. It's one of my favorites.
Cindy, I went to graduate school at OU, and I've read Bone, and I did not know that those two things were correlated.
Oh my gosh, no!
I feel like all of my instructors in Athens just totally like blew it with me. I'm going back, and I'm like demanding my money back. Yeah. Give me my money back.
Yeah.
Okay, then final one, Cindy, just between you and me, and well, of course, the thousands of people listening to the show. Who is an artist that you just don't like very much?
You know, I mean, this one, in some ways, it's easy. It's like, oh gosh, we all hate Jeff Koons. You know, Rubens makes me a little crazy. You know, and you know, there's a lot of artists that I'm just not excited about.
Yeah.
You know, I think one thing that happens is I have found that artists that don't continue to generate a conversation with a public, I quickly lose interest in their work, which is why, honestly, I will always love, and this is one a lot of people hate, and I love her, Yoko Ono. I think she's God. So it's easier for me to now flip and go to the ones that I love because I'm constantly finding that their work inspires. But Jeff Koons, we can all.
He will not be making a stop over in Columbus at the art
No,
museum anytime.
and exactly. He's watching tonight. And,
oh God!
Really?
Oh no!
Yeah.
Oh no!
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, Cindy, thank you very much for being our guest this evening. I've loved this talk, and we appreciate everything you had to say.
Well, it's been an honest pleasure. Thanks, guys.
All right,
thanks,
thank you.
Cindy. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. I love just about everything she had to say tonight. That was pretty spectacular. Especially for me, that last question that I kind of snuck in there about reflecting on our experiences, just great concrete examples that a lot of teachers can use, and I know a lot of teachers appreciate.
Yeah, and I would recommend it. I watched her TED Talk, I don't know, almost a year ago, and I just kind of rewatched it again this summer when I knew she was giving the keynote talk. And for me, I always just keep going back to those three tenets that she kind of talked about: being comfortable with ambiguity, getting teachers to get their students to generate ideas, and that research component. And something she said that I think is just very, very true is that oftentimes we as teachers are the ones doing that work. We're generating the ideas.
Yeah.
We're wrestling with ambiguity of, is this going to work? We're kind of grappling with the fear of not knowing. And to be, like she referenced in the Lego movie in that talk, we don't want to be the master builders. We want our students to be the master builders and start to steer some of their own learning. So.
And I like what she said about, like, are you the box of Legos that comes with instructions, or are you the bucket of Legos that gives you that freedom to kind of create what you want?
Right. Well, and she said something I think very concretely tonight that I don't know if I had sussed out in her TED Talk, which was the ideas steer the skills, and I love that we kind of had another mixed metaphor of animals, of the chicken leading the the horse cart race dance, and,
whatever it is.
Right, but that takes us back to Ian with his donkey. I was like, oh gosh, another mixed animal here. But I started to think about how true that is. That if a kid has some really great ideas that really can steer some of the skill sets, and it's our job as teachers to then see their interests, see what they want to do, and bring them into some really good concrete skills that we know will help them realize that idea and get there. And I always think of like martial arts. You don't want to attack anyone head on. And maybe this is a bad analogy to think about confrontation with your students, but it takes a skillful teacher and person to kind of have a student coming at them with their own interest, gently step off to the side and kind of take their energy and enthusiasm to a new place. And I think, that's just a really interesting new paradigm for teachers, instead of just, here's what I'm going to teach you, but it's working with kids and taking them in weird directions, I think.
Yeah, and I think that is kind of a process, and like you said, there's a little bit of an art to it, kind of directing kids, where they may need to go. Because sometimes as teachers, we have that knowledge base to build on, and we can kind of direct them in places that we think that might help them. And like you said, there's a very subtle way to do that, and I think
and it's subtle because it's like we're not just letting them go off on their own. We're not letting them walk into the forest and get lost. It's like, I see where you want to go. I'm also going to take you to some other places, but I'm going to let you think that you got there on your own when the whole time I was kind of taking you down there anyway. And that's where I think it's like, that's when you get really skillful, and that's when teaching can be really, really fun.
Yes, for sure.
Well, man, what a great talk. That was just a lot of fun, and I think she just hit on so many she's a great topic. So did you have any other kind of takeaways from tonight?
No, I'm good to go. I'll just go back and listen to the show 2 or 3 more times, because there was so much good stuff in there.
Well, and since I've recently started school, I kept thinking about, okay, what am I doing that is playful, fun, letting my students generate ideas, and there's some things I think I'm doing well, and then there's some things like, man, I'm already kind of like being a little teacher-centric and teacher-focused. So I hope the people listening kind of got some specific things that they can apply in their classroom right away, because I know I did for sure.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
Well, hey, great show, man. Everybody make sure you check out my Twitter feed and Tim's hashtag AOE Live, and you can check out any links to the discussion. We'll also be on the chat roll with Crowdcast for a little bit if there's any other questions, just to kind of continue the conversation for a little bit longer.
Yep, and once we close up shop, the podcast will be available on the AOE Live page, and by tomorrow it should be able to download on iTunes, the podcast app, and Stitcher if you're an Android user. Listen to it on your drive, at home in the evening, or even during your planned time. I am Tim Bogatz, and on behalf of Andrew McCormick and everyone at the Art of Ed, thank you for joining us on AOE Live.
Thanks, everybody. See you later. Goodbye.